Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today on Masechtas Be'ed of Chav Ches, we're going to begin at the very top of Chav Ches Amud Aleph by the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shoikel Adam Basar Keneged Hakli. A person, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is allowed to weigh meat using a scale, which on the other side of the scale is some type of kli, or Keneged a koifetz, or a hatchet. So why is this allowed? So Rashi says, Mutter hulishko keneged a kli, keneged a koifetz, which is referring to a sakin gadol, a large knife, she koitzvin bobasa, that we use to chop meat. The ika shinoi v'loi habi masa dechoil. The issue is uvda dechol. If we do something which appears like it's a weekday activity, that's something which we do not do on Yom Tov. However, if we do some type of shinoi, something in an indirect or unique manner, then it's allowed. We do not allow you to use a scale at all. It doesn't make any difference. If you're using a kli or a koifetz as a shinoi, you still can't use it. So my kol ikr, he says you can't use it at all. So Rabbi Yehuda, Omer Shmuel, afilu shamru min achbarim. Even if the whole purpose of it is to protect it from mice, says Rashi, ein nice and oisom moznayim hatuin biyated gavoa. That you cannot put this scale and hang it on some type of a peg. In other words, it's something which you cannot use for any purpose at all. Rav Idi Barabin Behuda Talia Bitarita. This is if you're referring to hanging it. Rashi says betabas, on a ring. The michse, as Rashi says, it appears kenosnu l'shem mishkol. It looks like you're doing it for weighing, which is not allowed. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shmuel tabach uman. If you have an expert butcher that knows exactly the weights, he's able to just hold it in his hand, and he knows how much it weighs just by doing that. Asalishko basar biyad. He's not allowed to weigh it by holding it with his hand. This expert butcher, asalishko basar b'mayim. He's not allowed to weigh it by the use of water displacement. A person is not allowed to make this beis yad in the meat. So on this, if you use your hand, then that is allowed. In other words, you're not allowed to use a kli to be able to make some type of indentation. However, using your hand is permissible. Again, this is something which is a shinui, which is unusual. Says Rashi, to hold it with one hand, and the meat in another hand, and to figure out this is the way that he normally did it. Again, with his hand. Beis yad, Rashi says, nekev, a hole, or that you should be able to hold on to it. You're not allowed to do it, but you can make the hole with your finger. As Rashi says, that you're not using a kli, the lav derech. That's not the normal way. However, if you use a knife, that is the normal way of doing things on a weekday. Kisha moicher basar oisabo beis yad. When you want to sell the meat, that's what you do. The nesmolokech lohaylichlo beso, and this way you give it to him so he can easily hold on to it. However, says Rashi, b'yamtiv sarach lishnais, you have to do some type of a shinoi in yamtiv. Lasos heker shein mekach memcher muterbo. So again, to show that you're not engaged in a weekday business-like activity. Back in the Gemara, Amar Rav Huna muter lasos siman b'basar. You're allowed to make a sign on the meat, and Rashi says shel yachlifu hanoisai, so that you shouldn't get confused. So by making some type of a siman, which is the whole question of bashan estelim and ayin, if there is tvias ayin, the Gemara in Chulin discusses, or some type of a siman, or if it's sealed, that's how it's allowed. But by making a siman, this is so that you'll know that you're allowed to eat it. Kihad the Rabba Baravuna Mechatech wa Atlas Karnasa. He would make hamantashin out of it. You can say a picture in Rashi, he would make into a triangle. And this is obviously something which was unusual, and it's not the way it grows. So he cut it this way specifically to make a siman. This Gemara is mentioned in numerous places, including in Il Metzias, which discusses if there's a siman on an item, then you're not going to achieve Yush Bailam. Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shaiklin Mana Keneged Mana. They were actually very lenient, and they would actually measure one piece of meat together with the other piece of meat. Mana Keneged Mana. B'yamtiv. So come on, who's that like? Clearly, Lok Rabbi Yehuda. The Lok Rabbanan, not like the Rabbanan either of our Mishnah. Why? Because Ik Rabbi Yehuda, Haimer Shaikel Adam Basar Keneged Kli, O Keneged HaKaifetz. So what did he say in the beginning of our Mishnah? He said that you're allowed to do it only with a shinoi, which is mashma keneged kli in, keneged midachrina lo. You can't use meat to other meat. You have to use a kli, something which is unusual. They definitely not like him, like the Chachamim say that you can't use it at all. So who's they like? Must not be like either opinion in our Mishnah. So Gemara says, Inhu the Ovid Rabbi Yeshua. Actually, you're right. Instead, they paskin like the sheet of Rabbi Yeshua. Who's that? The Sanya. Rabbi Yeshua oimer shaiklin mana keneged mana b'yamtiv. He says beferish that person is allowed to weigh meat against the other meat on yamtiv. Rabbi Yosef halach Rabbi Yeshua halach's like him. Why? Hayel tanan bebecharis kavase. Because we have actually a Mishnah which is going to support this found in Masechtas Bechor. Says Rashi, the asu lishkoy of limchor bechor. Balmum. Again, here we are continuing discussing, as we have in the past couple of blot, a firstborn animal that you're not allowed to shecht it while it's tam, even bizman is there is a chiv kares on eating it, so you have to wait until it develops a blemish. So it says Rashi that you cannot weigh and sell a bechor which has a balmum, to shecht it, sheshachtu kayin, belitra, that he shechted it with a particular weight, shalasos masachoil bekachim. We don't allow you to do this when it comes to kachim because it's, as Rashi says, the bezaynhu. Even though it has a balmum, nonetheless it's a bechor. So therefore, because of that, we don't want you to engage in weighing it in this way, which is showing that it's just like regular meat. The katani demana keneged mana, meat against meat. B'yodea kama mishkol rishayna. You know how much the weight is of the first one. The shaika keneged mutter. He allows you to do this when it comes to bechor. So alma lav uvdechol chashivle. Obviously, this is not considered to be uvdechol, because if it's uvdechol, then we'd say it's a bezayin to kachim. We wouldn't be able to do it. So it must be some type of acceptable shinoi mana keneged mana, and that's why it's allowed. Let's go into the Gemara now. What do we see in Masechtas Bechoros? Did not kavasa we paskin like this. It says did not. We learned the Mishnah on Lamed Aleph, which is like smack in the middle of that Masechta. It's about a 60 blot Masechta, 61. Psul hamakdoshim. When it comes to that which is kodesh, which became pasul, hanasan lahakdish. So one derives hana, someone who derived hana from that which became hektish. The shayklin mana keneged mana. It says beferish, you're allowed to weigh mana keneged mana bibechor. So therefore, it's obviously a raya. The fact that you're able to do this must be some type of a shinoi. When we buy no, but dilmaloi hiyadkan loy kam Rabbi Shua hacha. Maybe the only time Rabbi Shua said his din is elo deleka b'zayin kachim. Maybe he allows you to do mana keneged mana is because there's no disgrace of kachim. This is chulin food. Rabbi Hasam, we're talking about a bechor, the ika b'zayin kachim lo. Maybe he will not agree to this and won't allow it. That you can, maybe you're not allowed to measure bechor mana keneged mana. Inami yadkan loy kamer rabbanan hasam el mishum dolei mechsi k'uvdin dechayil. The whole reason why is because it doesn't look like uvda dechayil. But in our situation where it's uvda dechayil, maybe you wouldn't say this din. So it's all totally on, does it look like you're engaged in a weekday activity? So memra, so you're coming to tell me that kapti hadadi must be that you're coming to say that they are makbid on one another. So Gemara asks, as we see Rashi, umim kapti hadadi Rav Chia, Rav Shimon, Rav Rabbi, lach like baser b'mishkol, that they argued regarding dividing up meat, weighing it. They were very forgiving of each other. They had a great connection toward one another. So remember the kapti hadadi hanhu Shem Benise de also Lebei Rebbe. There were these 7 children who went to this house. They found 5 of them Bei Rav Chia, V'loi Kapid Rav Shimon Berebbe. He wasn't makbid on them. So what exactly? Actually, Shav Benisa is not 7 kids. The Rashi says Shiva Dogim. There was actually 7 fish. Shavo Rebbe v'nimsa shenato Rav Chia chamesh shemalichin lebeso. He took 5 of the 7 and brought them home. Amar Papa Shadi Gabri Binayu. Ni Rav Chia Rav Yishmuel Rav Yosi Rav Shimon Berebbe Ubar Kapara. So basically, we're just saying you have to obviously talk about different individuals, because clearly they would not be makbid on one to another. Question TB5. Ha'im mutar lasas b'yomtiv chor, a hole, b'basar k'dei sheyeh bo b'syad le'echos. Are you allowed to do that? So the answer is, like most answers, it depends. If you're doing it b'yad, so that's allowed. However, if you did it b'sakin, as Rashi says, with a knife, which is the normal way of doing things, that is not allowed, because that's der cholhu. That's considered to be like a regular weekday activity. Okay, let's now see the next Mishnah. Ein mashchizin es sakin b'yomtiv. A person's allowed to sharpen with a sharpening tool a knife on yomtiv. Aval masia al gabi chaverta. A person is allowed to sharpen it opposite another knife. And Rashi says, because the mishani b'der chol. Again, as long as you're doing something which is unusual. Amar Rav Huna lo shanu. The only time we say this in elva b'mashchazes shel evan, that we're strict when it comes to a sharpening tool made out of stone. Aval b'mashchazes shel eitz, if it's wood, mutter. In that case, that's something which is not the norm for sharpening things, and therefore he'll allow shel eitz. So Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel Hadi Amar shel evan aser. That's we said that the stone is aser lomar and ella l'chadda. The whole issue is just sharpening a knife with that. If all you want to do is remove the fattiness off of the knife, you're allowed to even use the sharpening tool of stone, because you're not using it for that purpose. It's for a totally different purpose. They're just removing the fats, and therefore you're allowed to do that. So what can we deduce? Mechlal must be that we can infer the b'shel 8. Obviously, if we're allowing, when it comes to shel evan, which is strict for shemnunis, so we're even going to mater 8 for sharpening. Nikadamasti law seifa. Some say a little bit differently based on the end part. B'shel 8 mutter. Amrav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Hadi Amar b'shel 8 mutter Omar el havashim nisa. You can only use this wooden sharpening tool to remove the fats. You can't even use that. You cannot use it for sharpening. So Mechlal must be that we can deduce the b'shel evan afil lahavishim nisaser. You can't even use the stone sharpener for something which is for an unusual reason, for removing the fats. Some read it based on the Mishnah. Ein mashchizin esasakin biyamta. So Rabbi Yehuda Mishmol lo shano el l'chadara. The Mishnah says you can't sharpen it. Lahavishim nisa mutter, but you're allowed to remove the fats with it. Mechlal can infer that gab chaverta afil l'chadara mutter, that if it's on the other one, the other knife, then it's totally allowed. That you can go knife against another knife. So maybe you can only use one knife against another knife to remove its fat. You can't even use a knife to sharpen the other knife. That even just to remove the fats is totally aser in that case. So man tana, who is the tana in the mashchasas aser that says that you're not allowed to use a sharpening tool to sharpen your knife? Rav Chisda delok Rabbi Yehuda cannot be like the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. The Sanya ein ben Yom Tov l'Shabbos el oichel nefesh b'lvad. The Tanakama says that the only difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov is oichel nefesh. You're allowed to do things for cooking for Yom Tov, not on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda mater af machshiri oichel nefesh. Rabbi Yehuda allows even preliminary food preparations can be made, and therefore clearly this is not like the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda is much more lenient. And how could it be that we're saying that you can't even remove the fattiness of this knife, which l'chayr should be you would say it would be allowed. So the fact that that it says you can't do it is not like Rabbi Yehuda. So Amalei Rabbi Rav Chisda Darshinan Mishmecha Halacha Rabbi Yehuda. Should we darshan your name that the halacha is in fact like the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda that we're mater af machshir echel nefesh and yafta barmalei yehi Rabba maybe at what Hashem's will the cholki hani mili mel yasa tidrashinu mishmi. May everything be quoted in my name in that way because yes. I want you to actually tell everyone that that's the din. Omer Rav Nechemia Bered Rav Yosef. Havi Kamina Kamida Rava. He was in front of Rava. Bahavi Ka Mavers. We continue Chav Chesed Beis. Mavi. They were wiping with Sakina. They were wiping a knife. Apuma de Dikula on a. So actually, this is Meshashi Sakin Al Piatzal on like a wicker basket. The Amrulei Lechadavda. Ka'avid, mar, or lahavishem nisa. Why are you doing this? Is it to sharpen it, or is it to remove the fats of the knife? Yarmeli, he said to me, lahavishem nisa. I'm just doing it to remove the fattiness. The chazisi ledaite, and I could actually see clearly in his intention that wasn't true. The lachadada ka'avid, he was actually really doing it in order to sharpen it. So ksavar halacha vein marin kain. So why wouldn't he just say that the halacha is allowed? So halacha vein marin kain. That is in fact the halacha, but we don't tell everyone in the world that in fact is the halacha. We kind of would rather keep it quiet. The question is why. So let's look at this Rash, which is also question 1. Madu in marin l'rabim the halacha Rabbi Yehuda lahatir machshir echel nefesh b'yamtiv. So Rashi says. Ein moirin l'harabim kain shel yizalzel av she'eshel asayis miboid yoim. The only time Rabbi Yehuda allows machshir echel nefesh is something that could not have been done before Yom Tov. However, if we start allowing it, people are going to start even doing machshir echel nefesh on Yom Tov, even though it could have been done on Erev Yom Tov. The chol hani d'sharinan kigon shenis kalku b'Yom Tov or shahaya esmol torud. Again, what will end up happening is people are going to start making excuses that they're able to actually do these things on Yom Tov. When the truth is, Rabbi Yehuda only paskins that machshiri oichel nefesh is mutter if it's something that could not have been done before Yom Tov. But in the event that we start paskining like this, people are going to start being using this as a loophole and start saying, oh yeah, that's correct. They couldn't have done it before Yom Tov. Therefore, even though it's a halacha the ein marin kain. Back to the Gemara. Omer Rabbi, havi kamida kamida mar, the havi ka maver sakina. He was wiping his knife, asafasa dercham, on the edge of a mill. The amrulei lechadada kaboy mar, o lahaver shemnisa. So again, the question was, why are you doing it? To sharpen the knife or to remove the fat? V'yarmali, no, lahavishim nisa. I'm just doing it to remove the fats. The chazisi l'dayat the l'chadada kavid. Really, he wanted to sharpen it. So why wouldn't he just tell the truth? It's because k'savar halach min marin kain. That's the halacha. We do pass on Rabbi Yehuda, but we don't publicize that is the halacha. Boilhu. Now the Gemara asks a separate question. Mahu lahiroi sakin l'chacham b'yamtiv. Are you allowed to show your knife to a chacham? Says Rashi, hatabach sakin l'chacham b'yamtim livdoik. Do we allow him to examine it? Says Rashi, mimichse ku'uvda d'choil. Is it considered to be like a weekday activity, the avsha milsa, because it ends up becoming just like something which is publicized and loud and something which people see? Shadaito limchor be'itliz. It gives the impression your das is to sell it in the marketplace, or maybe we don't have that concern. So the Gemara says as follows: Rav Mari Bered Rav Bizna Shari. He allowed it for Rabbanan Asri. So we have a machlokas. Rav Yosef Omer Talmud Chacham Royal Atzmo. A Talmud Chacham could examine the knife on Yom Tov himself, and then afterwards he could lend out that knife to others. Yom Rav Yosef Sakin Sh'amda Moto L'chadavda B'Yamta. If you have a knife that was Amda, Rashi says it's like standing still, Mecharifos, that it's not sharp. Says Rashi Shalo, she'enu chayteches yafa avalo nifgama. There aren't any like major dents in the knife, but it's a very dull knife. So the answer is you're allowed to sharpen such a knife on Yom Tov. They allow it. Why? It says Rashi, now v'yapagav de be'esmoil mishilshum hischil hakilkul. Even though it was already getting ruined from yesterday and the day before, so you would think maybe he should have taken care of it. The savar lo tzurchina. So we say habile lasuki adaitim esmol. He should have had intention from before. The savar lo tzurchina, that he's going to think that I don't need it. El nifkama esmol lo havishari the muchkilkul shala v'habile mevid esmol. So again, the question: if it was a pagam, then you should have done it on Erev Yom Tov. But if it was such a small thing, which is not very sharp, you may not have thought about it, and therefore we're more lenient when it comes to a dull knife as opposed to a knife that's very clear that has severe nicks and problems with it. Okay. So again, sakin sh'amdu mutal chada b'Yom Tov. B'hani mili hu de paska agav duchka. It became dull because of you're pressing it, says Rashi. Means you still have the ability to use it. Or you press hard with it, it will cut. However, let's say, says Rashi, that it doesn't cut at all, then you can't sharpen it, because it's so dull that you can't even, with difficulty, use it. Obviously, it's going to take you a long time to sharpen it, and that's too much of a tircha we don't want you to engage in on Yom Tov. Darsh Rav Chisda, V'yitem Rav Yosef. Echad sakin shenifkum echad shvud shenifratz shenirtza. When it comes to a knife which has these nicks, or let's say you have a spit, a metal spit that broke off, the echad gerifas tanor b'kirayim, or a shovel of an oven or a stove, b'yamtiv banul machlokas b'hud b'rabbanan. So regarding all of these different items, we have a machlokas. What exactly is the din? What one should do. It says Rashi, Nichnasu b'davar zel machlosan. We get engaged into this machlokas. Shemimis chalkaisam on yuchayil lilmoid. From their machlokas we can see shaf elu machshiri oichelhein. These are all considered to be machshiri oichel nefesh, things that prepare for the food. The sanya ein ben yom tov l'shabbos el oichel nefesh molvad. Rehuda mater av machshiri oichel nefesh we saw. So my time at the Tanakama. Why does the Tanakama say no? You're only allowed for like cooking oichel nefesh, but not machshiri. So Makra, who levado yesolachem, who v'lo machshirov. It seems to be exclusive, and it's saying as a miyat that you can only use things for yourself for cooking, for oichel nefesh, but not the preparations to get to that point. Rehuda Makra lochem for any of your needs, which means even machshiri oichel nefesh is allowed. Okay, fine. So, weiter. The Tanakama hoksiv lochem. So lochem is mashma even mater machshir echel nefesh. So what does he do with the word lochem? So amalchahu lochem v'lo nachrim. It means you can only cook for yourself, but not for nachrim. Or the language was kusim, as we saw before, or klavim. Ve'idach nami hoksiv hu. So how do you rectify the steer in the psukim? Kasha. Kan machshirin shef shalasayis and Erev Yom Tov. Kan machshirin shef shalas and Erev Yom Tov. As we said, it depends on whether or not it's something that you could have done from before. If you could have done it before Yom Tov, so then no, you cannot. We're not mater machshir echel nefesh. On that we say who. However, when it comes to something that you couldn't have done before, you couldn't have, so we say lachem, that we matir even machshir echel nefesh. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel. Shvud shenirtza. When it comes to a spit that broke off, also l'sakno b'Yom Tov. We say that you're not allowed on Yom Tov to fix it. So Rashi says, Shar yochel ishtamish bo kamo shehu, because you could actually use it. This is actually Rashi's question 2 rather in Dirshu. Ma pirish nirtza. It broke. Madu also l'sakno. So on this question 2, let's look at the Rashi as the answer. He says that Shahar Yachal Ishtamish Bo Kamoshu, you could actually use it right now it's not totally defective. Betircha delot sarchu, and therefore by you fixing it, it's something you don't really need to fix. You can fix it, making it better, but it's not really necessary, and therefore it's usher to fix. Pshita. Even though all you want to do is really straighten it out. That's all your intention is. You don't really need to hit it with a hammer. Yomi Rabbi Yehuda Mishmul Shvud Shitzolo Boy Basar. If let's say you have a spit in which you used on Yom Tiv to cook meat or to roast meat, also to be Yom Tiv. At that point, you're not allowed to touch this spit because it's muksa makmas miyas. Rashi says, "Nimos umuksa kor nasa sarch Yom Tiv." You don't need it anymore. All you have is this dirty spit, and therefore you're not allowed to touch it. It's muksa. However, Rav Adam Barabba Omer that Rav Malchiyoi with a vav shaimto manicho bekern zavis. You are allowed to move it, like drag it, and again in an abnormal way, and then you can shove it into a keren zavis. So it's a kula that we allow you to at least move it. The only time you can move this spit is only if there's at least some meat on it. No, even if it doesn't have any meat on it, you're still allowed to move it. Comparable to the din, as it's brought down in Masechta Shabbos, that a person is allowed to move a thorn, which is a danger to people, out of the Rishus Harabim, and you're allowed to move it pachas medalad amos. You can't carry dalad amos, which is an issur d'oraisa, carrying dalad amos in Rishus Harabim, but pachas medalad amos is allowed. So too over here, it's allowed to move it because it's something which is hot, something which is dangerous, something we don't want just lying around. Shvud, which we just talked about, this din of a spit. Shvachos, when it comes to maidservants, begumos, and holes, Rav Malchiyoi. This is a quote by the name of Rav Malchiyoi, who again, he doesn't have a lot of quotes throughout Shas, so we want to lump these three areas together so we remember what he said, the one with a vav. So again, shvud we already established, and the question is, what is shvachos? Maidservants. So the Gemara, Rashi says in the first wide line, reminds us of a Gemara in Masechtas Ksuvos. Even if you have 100 maids, we still want the wife to do some work. Why does she have to work? She has 100 maids. So Rashi says, because if we allow a person just to sit around and do nothing and be totally unproductive, it can cause a person to end up doing inappropriate, lewd things. The Amarav Malchio halacha Rebbe Lezer halachas like him. Gumos. What is this whole notion of holes? It has to do with the pores or holes in the hair where hair used to be. So that's what it's referring to. It says Rashi, Dim nimsu la gumos shel makoim seir. If you find holes, pores where hairs used to be, even though those hairs aren't there anymore, but the fact there's a hole where the hair must have grown, therefore that constitutes as a gedolah, and therefore the various halachos of yibam chalitza would apply. Back in the Gemara, blurius efer mikla v'gvina ramalchiyah. However, when it comes to these three other things, the din is quoted by Rav Malchiyah with an aleph. So blurius is a haircut. Rashi says, Kusi hamistaper Yisrael, a non-Jewish barber, kivan shegi lebluriaso, the moment that he reaches this part of his hair, shaimet es yadai, you have to remove his hand. We don't want this kusi to cut your hair in a certain way that which it was done for the sake of avodah zara. Fine. And which is shalosh etzba'os l'chorach l'chosi boseh, 3 finger amounts in all directions. Okay. Ephraim Miklas, Rashi says, Lo yitin adam Ephraim Mikla al gabi makaso, then nishir kiksos kaka. That a person is allowed to put these certain ashes on a wound because it ends up becoming permanent, just like that of a tattoo. And lastly, gvina, when it comes to cheese, it says nema aser gvinos. Why are some cheeses aser? So he says, shemachlikin poneha b'shumin chazir, because they would smooth on its surface the fattiness of pig, and obviously that makes it not kosher. Rav Papa Omer, back in the Mishnah, back in the Gemara, Masnisa and Masnisa Rav Malchia, Shmaisa Rav Malchia, you will see Manich Masnisa and Malchusa, so my minayu, Yikabenayu Shvachais. The only difference between the two is Shvachais, this case again of the maidservants, the Masnisani, because that actually is a Mishnah, and therefore you would flip them around. Let's see the next and last, let's see this next Mishnah. Well, Yomer Adam Latabach, a person should not say to a butcher, quote, Shekoyli bediner basar, that I want you to weigh out for me a certain amount of money worth of meat. You're not allowed on Yom Tov to start talking about money. That's not allowed. He could, the butcher could divide it up without mentioning anything in money and just give it to him in that way. So heichi avid. So exactly how could this work? After all, as we said, we don't want any monetary or dollar signs to be mentioned. So what should be done? Kihaz, we continue Chavtas Manala, the Besura Amri Tarta Upal Tarta. They would say a tarta or half a tarta. Benarash, in that city, Amri Chelka Upalga Chelka. These are other different types of sizes. Tomadisa Amri Uzi Upalga Uzia. Benarpakod Uvamas Machasya Amri, they would say Rava Upalga Rava. Which again, what they would say, they would cut it into equal sizes of pieces, and that's how they would know its value. So instead of talking about the money, they would cut it in a certain size, and therefore they knew that that's basically how much it was, but they just wouldn't mention the costs on Yom Tov. Okay. Let's see, question TA 3. Shvud shetzolbo basar b'Yom Tov. Be'eza oifen, if you have this spit, when are you allowed to move it? So we said that you can move it and drag it in an indirect way, which is called tiltum and atzad. If a tanoi sheshel of kazai, if a tanai, it's on condition there's a kazai's basar. Ravina matir tiltul gomer kadei shelo yizokubo, because of the issue, just like the thorn in the Rosh Hashanah, we don't want a person to get injured by it. Adkan.